It looks like this camera's funky, going in and out with the light. I apologize. Hope that's not too distracting. I don't know if I can come up with a better answer right in short order while we're doing this live. Any rate, the talk is going to be so captivating, you're not going to think about the picture. What is the picture? What's the small picture, big picture? I don't know what to say. Afghanistan has been, I guess is a bad word, a cluster something. But for a couple different reasons, many different reasons. I think that, we're not here to talk about Afghanistan. This is a coronavirus conversation. We're going to be talking about COVID and the way it's affecting everybody, or the way that the way it's being handled is affecting everybody. That's what the analogy I want to make with Afghanistan. We were destined, in a sense, to fail because we never had a firm goal of what we intended to do, how we intended to change Afghanistan, or change ourselves to adapt to Afghanistan, or to affect a particular idea, concept, bring, in the old style, a colonial version to change Afghanistan to make it into a Jeffersonian democracy. I think we were reasonably successful when we had more urge and direction in that regard. Germany went from Nazism, and it's a pretty stalwart Republican democracy these days, and South Korea ditto. So we have had the urge to imprint ourselves in given ways, but we had to know what we wanted. This is the point I'm trying to make here. You can't succeed if you don't know what you want, and if you can't apply yourself well enough to make what you want occur. In the case of coronavirus, it keeps changing what it is, in fact, we think we want. Do we want to do what Australia is thinking it's doing, which is be a place devoid of coronavirus for the duration? As long as Australia contains human beings, they're going to be at risk of having problems with coronavirus because coronavirus is transmissible. Do they think they're just going to outlast it? Are they going to be so vaccinated that nobody in the entire country is ever going to get COVID? I think this is absurd. I think people have so many misconceptions, kind of trying out being doctors. If you, I don't know, whatever profession you have, there's a thing called Gell-Mann amnesia by Murray Gell-Mann. He was a physicist, and he would read the newspaper, and kind of take things at face value, whatever was stated. They're talking about Afghanistan or, some other crisis, OPEC, oil prices or whatever. And he would always assume that the authors knew what they were talking about. And it's only when they got to his particular specialty, physics, nuclear physics, and all that kind of stuff, that he would say, whoa, these guys have no idea what they're talking about. They have no idea about physics. And then his Gell-Mann amnesia was that you forget that when you go to some other topic, that in the context of somebody who actually knows about that particular item, they're feeling exactly the same way about the reporter's ignorance of that topic as well. Well, we should be having a little bit of Gell-Mann amnesia towards the way our bureaucrats are pretending at being doctors. Right now, there's the absurdity of closing down in certain places that are not really getting any deleterious effects from the Delta variant, so-called, the India strain of the Wuhan coronavirus, COVID-19, whatever you feel like calling it, and yet people are forced to be wearing masks indoors and in schools for the second year running. It's lunacy on stilts. Maybe almost the third school year running is being affected by this. This is going to have huge implications for our children. For their relations with each other, for the way they look at the world. It's a horror. I don't know any other way to put this. This is ineptitude based on miscalculation, which are based on not having direction, which are based on not understanding a problem, which are based on not having a firm conception or a paradigm on how to proceed. What is COVID-19 really needs to be defined. Is it a severe, horrible illness? Is it an illness that affects children? Is it one that affects old people? Are the old people protected? Does a vaccine supposed to be perfect? There are lots of questions that people don't really have the answer to. And so they're kind of like, like I said in the intro, the promo to this, it's kind of like Will Ferrell or the Marx Brothers dressed up as doctors. They're having a robust, wonderful time, pretending to be doctors. But the effect would be just as if Will Ferrell or the Marx Brothers were your physician without having studied, without having. And I'm not trying to put the role of physicians as necessarily any more clear-sighted in this, because I think for the most part physicians have gone along with whatever comes along. I think I've mentioned on previous broadcast, I hang out at a few different venues, and some of them have other physicians. I'm a general practice physician, but there are people who ostensibly know more about certain subjects than I do, and but I will discuss this with anybody, because I think, frankly, it's not just a medical issue. It's a medical issue that intersects with interests. And those interests are public, those interests are economic, and they are also health. In this case, they're also political. They're also having to do with freedoms. And you can see the way this is played out in different places. We are not able to do experiments on individuals and human beings for ethical reasons, oftentimes, and in real time, it's difficult with an actual virus going around to do any real-time prospective experiments, let alone double-blinded randomized controlled studies, which are the gold standard. So we look at different countries doing different things, and these different countries do different things themselves at different times. And right now it seems to be that everyone's just kind of like going to the default position of putting on a lot of masks and hoping for the best. While everything else kind of gets filtered out. There's these huge pushes and in a sense coercion towards vaccination, which don't necessarily make sense for the populations chosen to be vaccinated. We're going to try to get to some aspects of this so we can maybe get myself off the screen and look at more internet stuff, which is not having the variable coloration that I'm having with this camera. I'm going to have to go back next week, I believe, to my previous computer and camera, which I still have, maybe just for these broadcasts. So what's the theme that I would like to get at? Well, one theme is, what would be the right way to deal with this? I think it's closer to being the flu, but it has a distinct difference from the flu. I mean, multiple distinct differences. The flu, we have a vaccine prior. This one we are putting in a vaccine during. This affects the strains that come around because there's essentially some biologic drift, some natural selection drift that has the kind of like the way bacteria combat an antibiotic by becoming resistant to it. This has some drift by having a resistant strain that not so much a resistant strain, but a slightly different appearing strain, so that the vaccine doesn't fully cover it. I think there's a reasonable amount of crossover, and enough crossover that people who are vaccinated are seemingly safer against hospitalization and so forth than they would be otherwise. So I think that the people who are at risk for illness in a general sense are the older people, and we've gone over this many, many times. People who would kind of linger with a cold or flu for longer periods of time are at higher risk. But the younger people, unlike influenza, are really not getting sick at all, even from the Delta strain. They are experiencing and they're contracting it, and they're showing positive because we are testing so much and we're finding more cases as a result. But again, the cases have been misdefined and misinterpreted and misapplied as anybody showing a positive test, when that's never been the case for medical illness throughout. This is a kind of a case of case creation rather than case. I don't know what my next gerund would be. Case curing. This is a case of over-diagnosing cases. So let's see what I can come up with to help convince you one way or another of my points. I think before, well, I'm going to maybe talk a little bit about coronaviruses themselves. So what I like to do is go back in time before 2019, before 2020, to look at how people looked at coronaviruses, for instance. or SARS or a lot of other things. So here's this is a book from the late 90s, a textbook, medical microbiology, well accepted. Clinical presentation: coronaviruses cause acute mild upper respiratory infection, common cold. This is the common cold. All right. What differs between the common cold and influenza? Well, they differ in severity. This is on a journal review of the common cold. The common cold, a review of the literature, and the part I highlighted here is since the discovery of rhinovirus in 1956, more than the rhinovirus is very common, but also coronavirus is one of them. There's parainfluenza virus. There's a bunch of different viruses that cause the common cold. The part that I'm interested in here is the reservoir for rhinovirus is school children who transmit rhinovirus infections amongst their peers and infect other family members at home. Here we go down to coronavirus. Coronavirus is between, say, 1/12 and a quarter of all upper respiratory tract infections in adults. An important feature of coronavirus is the short-lived immunity resulting in a high reinfection rate. The mode of transmission of coronavirus is likely due to aerosol inhalation. However, it doesn't grow well. This goes on. And they actually mentioned the recent novel SARS-1 from 2003. The point I'd like to get to here is that the common cold is different from influenza. Influenza has an animal reservoir, so it's with us, and then it's not with us. And it has a chance, in a sense, to get stronger and come back into a population that is not as ready for it as they would be if it had just hung around. The common cold is not that big an illness. It doesn't really knock us out as much, and it just kind of passes between people to people to people. The comparison I gave is maybe a horrible one, but football season. Football games occur once a week because they can't do them every day. Unlike baseball games, you can do them over and over and over again because people don't really have that much wear and tear from a baseball game. So they can play 9 innings, 15 innings, 20, whatever, and then they're back the next day to play some more. Or cricket, some sport like that. They don't have that much action, and it doesn't really tax the players that much. Football does, and so you can't do football every day, or you can't do the real professional style football every day. So they need a week off, and if they don't have that week off, they don't play that well. So similarly, the flu kind of packs more of a punch, and people would be more laid up from the flu. They're not going to really pass it around well enough. So you either get one or the other. If you don't knock people over, if you don't like bowling, throwing a bowling ball down the alley, if you knock all the pins down, it takes a while to reset the pins. And this is the case with the flu. Everyone has to kind of be reset before another flu can come around. The flu is not going to be able to transmit. It kind of knocks all the bowling balls down, all the people down, and it's done. And so it comes back the next year having incubated somewhere else. It needs to stay alive, as it were. And the way it stays alive is not in those people anymore. It goes to an animal host. It's probably there all along. But then it gets transmitted in a new strain to which people are not immune in the following year. So they will have a new chance at it. I mean, the virus will have a new chance at us, as it were. That's why we keep coming up with new flu, strains and new flu vaccines year after year. Coronavirus is either in one of these two categories. It's either in the knocks all the bowling pins down and it would need to come back after a while, or it's in the not so severe case, and it can kind of transmit from person to person. I actually think, oddly enough, I hate to be kind of wimpy about this, but I think it's actually a little bit of both. It acts like a severe flu in the oldsters, and it acts like a common cold in the youngsters. So the youngsters can pass this around, and it's not that big a deal, and they can maintain themselves as a reservoir of sorts. But it's my favorite phrase. It's a difference it's a distinction without a difference. It doesn't really matter because they're not getting that sick. So what we're having now is a case where, again, we are redefining cases. I'm going to just show you this briefly. I came across this for other reasons. I'm writing a patient book on cancer, and I was interested in, I'm not sure how I came across this, but if you see here, let's make sure I'm sharing this. If you see, this is an article from the, I think, the late 90s as well, and they're talking about case finding. Let's see. If some insist that a case be regarded as a person needing action through screening, it needs to be acknowledged, and that the activity is more accurately called case creating than case finding. Without it, many people with screen positive results would never have come to medical attention. It would then make it clear that the activity should not automatically be regarded as beneficial. Okay, maybe this is not very clear, and I apologize. The time has come to abandon the use of case finding. It provides the wrong intellectual framework for the understanding of screening. So in medicine, a lot of times we will do screening tests to find something the patient may not even know they have. And this is okay for a mammogram, for instance. We have a screening mammogram, and we want to find something that's very dangerous that might be lying mysteriously unknown, occult to the patient. PSA is in this category as well, prostate cancer, so forth, but prostate cancer may be so quiet that it may never cause harm. So there becomes a question in medicine whether we should do a lot of PSA testing the way we do mammograms, because mammograms are, earlier age and more, breast cancers are earlier age and more dangerous than a prostate cancer, although either one can cause damage. Now, if you just are doing testing to find something else that you care about that the patient may not care about, may not affect them, then it becomes something called case creating here. So, you are making your own criteria, your own action. So this is way, way, way long. This is decades before COVID-19. But what we're seeing right now, for a large extent, with the school children and so forth for Delta, is case creation. We are finding cases by calling them cases in people who don't have symptoms, and then we're making them do the things that we would do if people had severe cases, such as the oldsters in March 2020 without vaccine. The people who have vaccine have diminished greatly by a factor of, say, 25 years being younger, oftentimes 10 or 100 times less danger to themselves vaccinated than unvaccinated, and that's wonderful. But there's no reason to think that the people who remain should be considered in that same category of risk as were the original oldsters for the coronavirus. Now, how do I know that? Well, first of all, I said a lot of different things there, and I apologize for giving a mouthful. But what we are calling Delta variant is the India strain. Okay, this is that is what it is. I can kind of show you these covariants here. They don't show the ancestral strain, which is pre-Greek letter from March 2020 and whatnot. So they're starting in the fall. There became these new strains. October 2020 is alpha, then beta, then I guess there was a gamma, very quiet, and then delta. So delta, I guess gamma was in Brazil. We don't hear that much about it. Alpha was the United Kingdom. Beta version was South Africa, and so forth. So I didn't choose every country on earth. We could do that, but I want to look at these particular countries, which I chose here: Australia, Brazil, India, South Africa, the UK, and the United States. And so these strains have shown up in time. So this is a time graph showing what the strain is, not how bad it is, not which how deadly it is, not how much it transmitted, and not the absolute number of cases. This is just which one is out and about. So alpha was here in the UK. They had it. It went away. That was with beginning of vaccination was here. So you could say, oh, maybe it was because of vaccination, or it just happens to go away anyway, because the other countries that had it didn't have the vaccination. In this case, India had a blip in April 2021 without vaccination. How do I know it was without vaccination? Because that's what it was. This is India, the vaccination rate and their vaccination rate in April was less than 10%. Later on, when they had the Delta, it was 10 to 15%. So that's really not that much at all. So what we see here with Delta is that it showed up in India first. That's the dotted line here. So I can make this one a little bit bigger for people's straining eyes. And then it showed up in other countries. It showed up in the UK next. And then it showed up in, what country is that? It's hard, I maybe have to make the windows a little smaller here. Then it showed up in South Africa. Then it showed up in the United States. So it went to place, and it became the dominant strain in those places. This is one means 100% of the strains there. And I guess where is it showing up now? In Brazil a little bit. But does this really matter? Well, let's look at India. Again, India essentially was unvaccinated last spring. And where are they on this list here? So here's India. So India, again, without vaccine, essentially, they had, this is the alpha strain, and this is the delta strain. So they had one, they had the other, they had a little bit of up, and they had some down, they had some up, and they had some down without vaccine. Okay, that's just cases. So they did this without vaccine. Delta, they are human beings, just like we have human beings. We have a lot of, Hindu people in the United States. They're not physically different, and they're going to have the same immune responses we did, and they basically solved this problem with their own immune responses to the Delta. So there's nothing extraordinary about Delta without a vaccine. Now, the number of deaths have essentially gone down to zero. Remember, there's 1.4 billion people in India, which I think would equate to something like 30,000 deaths per day on a regular basis, maybe more, maybe 40,000 or something like that. So you're talking about a minuscule fraction of those deaths per day. This is less than, I'm not going to do math well here, maybe this is 1% or something like that of the death total per day from COVID. So this is not an issue anymore. I don't know whether they're wearing masks. I haven't really, examined this, but they're getting some vaccine, but it's after the fact. It's sort of irrelevant. They're not going to have an issue with Delta because they already had Delta. Now, I'm not saying this is everywhere in India, because India is a big place, and they can have outbreaks perhaps in other parts of India, because we think of it as one country, but it's really multiple different places, spread by 1,000, 2,000 miles. So what does this say about other countries? Again, this is a country essentially unvaccinated. This is South Africa, and they are having cases now of Delta, as we saw from the covariant page. So they had, I believe, this is the ancestral strain. It's called. This is the alpha. It was beta. I forget which. I guess it was the beta strain, and now they're on Delta. We'd have to check our covariant page. Where was it? So where were they? South Africa is the dotted line. Oh yeah, so they were on beta over here. So getting back to South Africa, so this was the ancestral strain, the beta strain, and this is the Delta strain. So fine, that, oh my gosh, they got a lot of cases, very little vaccination. Does it matter? Well, it matters a little bit. They are up to a few hundred deaths. I don't have the population list. Where's the population of South Africa? I think there's, gosh, where is the population? I'll come back to this later. I believe there's 100 million people in South Africa, and that would equate to, something on the order of 3,000 deaths per day, and so they're having, again, a small fraction. But again, so they're going to experience what India experienced, and they had some cases with the ancestral, some with the beta, and now with the Delta. But in each of these cases, they're going to go through the same essentially bell curve and have the cases and have those cases go away. What else? The United States, we are applying rules in places that we don't need to. I'm in Massachusetts currently. They're putting mask mandates on. We have oftentimes 4,000 cases and 0 fatalities from COVID in a given day. We had much more of the ancestral strain early on in the spring of 2020. Ditto to New York and to other places in the Northeast. And so we're not really having much in the way of cases today here. Excuse me, we're not having much in the way of deaths because we've experienced a fair amount of background immunity. Daily cases in the U.S. have gone up because we're getting the Delta. This is a different view of the same issue. This is state by state in the United States. What fraction, is not how many, but what fraction of what you're having is which COVID. And right now in green, we are all having the Delta. That's pretty much everywhere, but we're having it to different extents. So if we look at the United States here, we can go state by state, and you can see which states are actually having the highest number of deaths, and none of them are that high overall, because I have to become a little bit more expert in population per state. But these are overall, even in the highest death states, the ones theoretically most affected, these are very small population fractions of the overall death total per day expected anyway. My standard for this is Massachusetts, where we are. Massachusetts has a population of about 10 million. You're expecting about 300 people to die anyway in a day. This is, 11 here is about 3% of the total deaths. This is not an overwhelming problem. Again, people, unless you figure out a way to have people stop dying, which would be its own problem because people live forever, they take up a lot of housing and whatnot. There's going to be the free flow of people coming in by birth, by immigration, and by transmigration, and there are going to be people leaving in one way or another, usually as they get old and die. So there's not much you can do about death. You can go nuts over it. You can do kind of what Australia is doing, which is absurd and sad. Australia is a country, I'm thinking somewhere in the range of 30 million people. I don't know what this is for, cold here. COVID mania returns Australia to its roots as a nation of prisoners. So there are actually some pictures I have here of they have quarantine camps. This is from the New York Times, and if this doesn't look spooky, I don't know, you tell me. They're keeping people here for weeks when they show up with a positive test. It's not a concentration camp. They're not intending to overwork you or kill you, but you got to hang out there against your will and get tended to by these wonderful people here. Not spooky at all. They closed down the country literally, for one positive test in the country. This is lunacy. They are locking people down to an extent unheard of. Citizens in Sydney may leave their homes only for essential purposes and not go more than 6 miles. I've heard that they have made this even more restrictive. You can only leave for certain, again, to go to the store or whatever. They can arrest you if you're not walking your dog or something of that sort. They've closed playgrounds. They've closed schools. Kids are going nuts. There's more talk of suicide from young people than ever before. I don't know where to begin and end with this. I don't know. It's just the ultimate sadness. I guess the next thing I want to go over, because it's crucial and important, is the vaccine, and the vaccine kind of being mismatched with people. I think I'm not, what they call anti-vax, which I think is a mischaracterization, is purposefully insulting, as if you don't believe in something, if you don't think you should do it all the time. I don't want to give things away, but I have kids, so presumably I've engaged in marital relations and whatever you want to call it, intercourse and so forth. Doesn't mean I want to do it all the time. Doesn't mean I'm anti-sex if I don't want to do it in the store, if I don't want to do it in the road, if I don't want to do it here and there. I'm not anti-baseball if I don't go to a baseball game every day. I'm not pro-baseball if I do happen to go to a baseball game. Just because you do something or don't do something, you have your own particular reasons for choice of doing it at any given moment. And to be characterized as anti-baseball if you don't go to a baseball game this year, it doesn't mean you might be agnostic, you might not care about baseball. It might not be for you, or you might be passionate about it. And you might think everybody should go to a baseball game, or whatever it is you happen to think is the thing to do. But if you are that person, you think just because you like something, you want to do something that's worked for you, that everyone should do it, you're sort of a fascist. I mean, that is kind of like, making people do your particular favorite yoga exercise because you're pretty much convinced it's going to add years to your life and makes you feel better is really obnoxious. Nobody likes that person. There are a lot of things I like doing. I like playing tennis. I don't think everybody needs to play tennis. I don't necessarily want everybody playing tennis. And I'm happy for people who like playing tennis to play it and so forth. I think it helps you. I think it makes you feel better, blah, blah, blah. But you don't want to listen to me talk about that. And you're going to find whatever you like to do. And you're going to make your own situation, your own judgments about the things you want to do based on the things that your experiences, your desires. And if you did want to play tennis, you don't, maybe not physically fit for it, or you're too young, you're 2 years old, you can't play tennis, you're 82 years old, you're too old to play tennis, or you happen to be 20 and you're injured, or you're doing something, who knows? There's nothing for anybody else to tell you what to do about it. We are having situations now on campus where people are being coerced in ways that if you, say, had touched somebody's arm or said the wrong thing to them, you would be, kicked off campus. Yet you can invade their body space essentially with vaccine by your determination that this 20-year-old needs it when, perhaps your 80-year-old does, but your 20-year-old does not. Anyway, so to just get the point here, this is an excellent study by an economist in Israel. Whom I've spoken to, fortunately, in recent past, and he has an interesting study which I recommend you look at. His name is Steve Ohana, easy to remember, kind of Ohana, and he's on Medium. So there aren't probably too many Ohanas on Medium.com. Just check this out, and you'll find his page, Young Adult Mortality in Israel During the COVID-19 Crisis. And a little bit like my guest from a couple months ago, Brent Kivet Kyler, he is doing an analysis of data without, sort of agnostic, without having predictions and so forth, and seeing what the data show. So this is kind of a big data play, and he's not bringing causation into this. He can't prove this because we're dealing with huge populations, but he winds up looking at different age groups and so the data is kind of scattered here, and it's in Israel. They had at one point a tragedy recently in Meron, where there was a death because of a collapsed staging, and there were a lot of young people who died in that instance. There's also been other instances of death in Israel. In the summer 2014, there was the Hamas-Israel war, and so those are the people in the military. There were more deaths, excess mortality. So he was looking at excess mortality for young people. This is the age group 20 to 49, and he found a kind of a blip here, and now he finds another blip here with vaccination. So it has not been, you may kind of see this a little bit scattered, but in the interim between 2014 and 2021, there has not been the 3-month moving average of excess mortality such as there had been except at a time of war. So why are these young people dying? Well, he can't answer that, but it is interesting that only since the young people started getting vaccinated were there these excess deaths. Now, I don't know how to parse all of this. There's a lot of data to be thrown here. I don't know. I asked whether there's the possibility that some of this is, people being miserable from lockdowns and so forth, and committing, suicide or drinking too much or overdosing, that kind of stuff on drugs, which has happened here. But his thought was they had a complete lockdown and didn't notice that same blip from that. So he thinks it's probably from the vaccine. I can't attest to that one way or another, but I recommend this pretty short article for what it is. And this is not a proof of anything, but it is a caution. Now, I think there is reasonable proof that there are more cases of myocarditis with vaccination. And, I think the algorithm, even shown in Financial Times, is such that people would do well to stay away unless they have strong, compelling reasons at a young age to take the vaccine. And I think that medically, you're on firm ground for cautioning people on that basis. Anyway, so I think I'm sort of at an end tonight. What are our take-home messages? Well, I don't know. Maybe you tell me. I think that people need to figure out what this is, how they want to battle it. My own personal predilection, medical predilection for battling this is that it is never good to do one size fits all for almost any illness, and it's certainly not good for this situation. People have to take things as it comes. I don't like people being treated as cattle. I don't think they should be herded into quarantine centers. I don't think they should be restricted and caged in and corralled the way cattle are. As we talk about herd immunity, we are not a herd. We are individuals and we have our own decisions and so forth. And the people who make their decisions about their own vaccination shouldn't be relying on other people to have theirs in order to have their own comfort. The vaccine, I think, is reasonably effective even against Delta strain, and people should go out and about and do what they were doing before people went, kind of loony over the Delta. What else? I don't know. You tell me, and I'll try to come up with some answers. In the meanwhile, please feel free to ask questions, and I would certainly appreciate if you could spread and share this in the meanwhile. Thank you so much. Have a great night.